Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Diane. Thanks so much. And good evening, everybody, and hello to you if you're watching this at another time on another day, which I'm sure that a lot of you will be. Emese and I are really pleased to do this session this evening on assessment in art and design. And I know for myself, Emese, and I wonder if you have the same experiences with your students and teachers that you work with, that it's a huge area of anxiety for even experienced teachers. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Susan, it really is. And it's also a contentious issue because there's such a spectrum of attitudes, even amongst the most experienced art experts, as to what constitutes good or worthwhile assessment in art and design. Some even question, should we even be assessing? And of course, we know in a formal education context, there's no question. There has to be some form of assessment.
Yes.
It's more, what does that look like? What definitely you should be doing and what you definitely should not be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, and particularly more recently, I think people have kind of assumed assessment means ticking something off, that it's done, or that you've achieved a certain kind of mastery is the word, isn't it? Or level, and I think that has it's a huge problem for us, art and design, because we don't work like that. And of course, artists do assess their work because it's about thinking, isn't it? It's about thinking about what you're doing and, working out your next steps. As an artist, that's what you do. You're constantly looking at your work and reflecting on it and developing it. And if you didn't assess it in that way, you're never going to move anything forward. So I think it's quite an interesting kind of concept, that idea of how we look at our work as artists, or and how we hope children will also reflect on their work, and how we think of as teachers, assessment, the big A word. Yeah.
I know I try to reassure my student teachers, my trainee teachers, that there's lots of good practice generally in terms of assessment, that they can apply the same principles in art. Certainly in terms of the kind of angles taken. So, for example, you mentioned about being an artist and being critical. Of course, we really want to be promoting pupil self-assessment and student self-assessment and their own awareness, because ultimately that's what, as a teacher, you hope to empower. But the danger of that is, and we know that when you're assessing your own work and evaluating it, you tend to be hypercritical and jump straight to negatives.
Yeah.
So therefore, you need to make sure there's absolutely space to have self-assessment and evaluation, whether that's spoken or written, and it's certainly going to be thought about, but balancing that with peer feedback, which tends to be a lot more positive, and it can be a real boost, and facilitate dialogues in the classroom, whether they're informal or more formal, and also the teacher level assessment as well, which isn't, and I try to emphasize this, it isn't more important. Of course, you have an overview, but it's those kind of three angles: the self, the peer, and the teacher. The kind of the triangle, triangulating those is part of the trick of it all.
It is, and again, I sort of think for many teachers, it's quite difficult to get your head around that aspect, isn't it? That actually it's not just your opinion, it's actually sort of, you can sort of look at the work in the ways that relate to what you were teaching about. You're still going to be making assessments, but it's not about being judgmental, I think. And I think that word it does can creep in, into our art classrooms if we're not careful. And we don't want to be ranking children who's the best.
No. I think equally, it occurred to me earlier today, is, in your class, say there's 30 children, you will have children who live for art and consider themselves very artistic. And I think as a teacher, absolutely you need to give them space. But if you're always directing attention to them for, you know, look at so-and-so's work, it's amazing, it's going to make the children who are less confident think, well, they're the artists in the class and I'm not. So it's that teacher awareness that you need in every lesson, that you're making sure different children get seen and get heard and get given attention. And I think that's where the peer assessment conversations, which could be, you know, one-on-one, and you could be kind of circulating and listening in, can be super valuable, because not everyone is confident standing up and sharing things and talking to an audience.
No, absolutely. But also, one of the skills of the teacher is to really know your children, isn't it? And to be able to see who's doing something actually really interesting with your project or your challenge or your, you know, whatever it is you're doing, and be able to say, oh my goodness, look what this child has done, which is like completely different from everyone else. What a great idea, you know, and have the confidence as a teacher, and the subject knowledge really, to be able to really kind of not just look for somebody who you think has done something pretty or nice, but actually really something that's interesting and innovative. So, you know, again, that's a kind of another way in for, and you are using your assessment, of course you are, and you're learning about that child and how that child's thinking and how that child is working in the subject area. So yeah, absolutely.
I always try to emphasize the importance of dialogue and the formative dimension, that it's about asking lots of open questions and modeling that key vocabulary, you know, the visual and tactile elements of the subject, but words which are art specific, they get so much attention into really complex grammatical terms in English lessons, which are just really complex. But in art, if we're using the vocabulary of art, craft and design on a regular basis, so when you're planning, thinking about, you know, what's my key terms today, how can I use them and then help the children use them. So I mean, to some degree, you know, if you're talking about adjectives, you can be really creative and there's not right and wrong with it, but there are certainly many terms and kind of solid knowledge in the subject that you want to be reinforcing and modeling and hoping the children are going to grab a hold of and be able to build on and show you that they understand what those terms mean.
Absolutely. And I think that the kind of dialogic classroom and the classroom environment, I was kind of bang on about this in my sessions, you know, the classroom is the environment, learning environment, as the third teacher, as Malaguzzi so brilliantly put, you know, that idea actually that we set up our art classrooms in a very different way than other lessons, and hopefully have kind of a bit of a studio feel going on there, where children are comfortable about talking about their work, comfortable about taking creative risks. You know, there's a lot kind of written about this dialogue in the art classroom and the importance of it. And again, as you said, just listening in to children's conversations about what they're maybe struggling with, or maybe what they're really excited about. Again, it's kind of bringing those conversations out into the forum of the classroom, so that all the children can, you know, grab onto some of that and use those key terms, and they become quite natural. Actually, the more you use them, the more the children will use them back to you, and you can go, oh my goodness, that's great. They've kind of got that idea or that concept from what they say. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we have to talk about sketchbooks as well, don't we, as being so important as a way of the learning journey, recording the learning journey and letting children have ownership over those. Because you hear stories where in some schools they sit on the shelf in a cupboard and come out once in a blue moon for best work.
Yes.
And we want them, it doesn't matter, I personally think it doesn't matter if the handwriting is scrappy or the spelling's not perfect. It's about the quality of the thinking. and it being a space where if something goes a bit wrong, that's not a problem. And actually, you want children to notice things that go wrong and they don't like, because if they can articulate it, they're showing their criticality. And that's what you have to do as an artist. Not
Yeah,
everything's perfect. If you
absolutely.
don't like it, if it's gone wrong, what does that mean? What's gone wrong? Why has it gone wrong? That's where the learning happens. And it's that creative risk taking that can be so uncomfortable because it's so visible.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, it's really sort of interesting, isn't it, to kind of think about what teachers, or some teachers, can, who aren't really have, maybe some teachers haven't got a lot of training in the subject. So and I think that the idea of the knowledge rich curriculum has not helped, because what is knowledge in our subject? And I actually was doing some training for some teachers this week, and one of them said that her school, before she took over the art leadership, it was about knowing about artists. So, you know, the sort of movements and the and this is like year 1 or 2 or something, and you know, the dates that they were alive and all this kind of stuff, and naming paintings, and that idea of knowledge, that you can actually say, well, does the child know that? Oh yes, they do. I can tick that off. And she said that she's kind of stripped it all back and taken all of that out. And I said, well, thank goodness, because you know, that is, if anything's going to put a child off, you know, art, is thinking that they're actually doing an A-level art history or something.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that has become problematic, and I think we have to really think about what learning is in our subject, and focus on that rather than the, you know, the knowing stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're going to
Absolutely.
know stuff as you go through.
It's really problematic, that narrow focus. And I know it's really big in secondary, because there's
Yeah.
that focus on quizzes, you know, how can you remember from last lesson what we did? And it's very simplistic, and I can understand in other subjects how that might be helpful, but it's very limiting enough. And it is a right, or there is a right or a wrong in that, and it's not helpful. I just had an idea and it went straight out of my head. Let me just have a little think.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
That's a good idea. Good idea.
It'll come back, don't worry. Yeah, but I was thinking about the different key stages, and what that assessment's going to look like, because it's going to be different, isn't it? In key stage 1, early years, really different.
Yeah.
What you're doing with older children, where you're kind of expecting, you know, different things from them, and that kind of you know, encouragement. It's all very much about positivity, isn't it? So we're not looking for things that they can't do. We're kind of hopefully facilitating them to be exploratory and be, you know, really have a good explore and experimentation, and be really encouraging. I think that's a really huge part, especially when you're working with young children. And also, I think that it's very easy to kind of look at a child's painting and say, oh, that's lovely. But then the dialogue stops at that point.
Yeah.
I think it's also about really developing your own understanding of what you can comment on, and say, I really like the way that you've mixed those colors, and you know, what could you call that color, or whatever it is, but actually using that language when you're talking to the children.
I remembered, Sue, what it was that I was thinking of, that in terms of planning, and now there's such a large emphasis because of Ofsted attention on the broad and balanced curriculum, on learning intentions and progression, that ultimately the bottom line is, if you're teaching a lesson or a series of lessons or an activity, what is the learning intention? What is the new knowledge? And have they got it? You know, did they need support? were they fine? Do they need extending? That whole idea, that's the bottom line. But I suppose the beauty of our subject is that there's, because it connects to lots of different things, we're going to be noticing things that aren't just about the learning intentions, but are about other kind of interests,
Yeah.
abilities, and this thing. And it's as you say, it's quite easy. The first gut reaction is, do I like it or do I not like it? And sometimes you have to bite your tongue and think, that's irregardless whether I think it's lovely. What are they saying? What have they learned? What can they do? I noticed there's a question that we've got there in the chat about recording assessment.
How exciting.
Yeah. Shall I read it out? We're often asked how to record assessments, both encouragement, reflections, and feedback. Some teachers are asked to write notes on artwork and in sketchbooks. What advice can you give to subject leaders and teachers wishing to give feedback but avoiding giving feedback on young artists' work?
That's a great question too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I don't know what age group this person's kind of particularly thinking about, but I'm presuming it's kind of key stage 2 if they've got sketchbook, although hopefully they're using sketchbooks with early years and key stage 1 as well. But I wonder whether it's a kind of key stage 2 group that this is referring to. And again, I would not be happy. I think this child's sketchbook is their own, and I think you can make a little positive comment in it, perhaps by putting a post-it note or something, or if you want to ask a question, or open up the sketchbooks and let the children look at each other's and post little comments or questions by them. That's a lovely way of recording, isn't it, really, what you might be doing. I think in terms of actually writing, I would not ever write a note on a child's artwork. I don't know about you, Emese.
Yeah, I'm thinking about in the early years, like in a nursery setting where the child makes a painting and then tells an adult, this is the dog, this is my mummy, and then the adult writes in a chunky black pen with labels on it for reinforcing literacy.
Yes.
Text-based literacy might, yes, that kind of, it's my artwork, it's my space.
Yes.
Please don't put your adults marks on it. That's
absolutely
important, isn't it? Yeah, but generally, how would you record assessments in terms of, well, again, it comes back to learning intention. So if you've got a class list with names, you could then, assuming everyone was on track, then who needed extra help, or who was, so you, maybe making a few little notes on who needed assistance and who needed extending, and then you've got a sense of which children was struggling to meet the learning intention and which were going beyond it.
I would even disagree with that. I have
to. Okay.
I'm just so anti-tick lists, and
okay.
I just think that actually it's about knowing your children, and there's nothing anywhere that says we have to.
No, it's very true. It's very true.
A rundown of a child's progress, and that should really be evident if you're managing your art in a really good way. For example, keeping records of children's artwork, so you can get the children to take their own digital images of their artwork. They could keep it on a digital site, a virtual site, their own little portfolio of their own artwork, put their own comments on it. You can, if you want to annotate something, you can make a little comment on that, I would think. But there's nothing anywhere that says we have to do that.
No.
It's actually much more about showing progression over time and children being able to articulate their own learning, and that should be a priority. And if you've got a lovely display of children's work and it's got all that preparation work up there with it. So it's not just the final
Mhm.
outcome, but maybe sketchbook pages photocopied, or children's comments, stuck up there with their work. So it becomes a learning display rather than just a kind of exhibition.
Yeah. I was gonna, well, as soon as you said children taking photographs, I think the more documentation you can
Yeah,
gather, and that's the
yeah,
beauty of the digital. You don't have to print it all out, but
no,
then you've got a record that's just a trigger for the memory, because you're
yeah,
just so busy, and children are so busy.
yeah,
They can't always remember what they did, but works in progress, if they can be recording their work in progress. And that's where obviously the sketchbook is valuable, because if it's got activities and experiments in it,
yeah,
that's all part of it. But yes, it's very
absolutely.
true. There's absolutely no expectation that there should be any kind of formal recording, so long as you can confidently explain to someone, the child, a parent, an
Yeah,
Ofsted inspector, this is what
absolutely,
my
isn't it?
class have been doing,
Yeah,
this is what I wanted them to achieve, this is what they have achieved, this is where they were coming from. And this is a really important point I always try to emphasize, that you could be teaching a year 6 class, but you
mm.
can never assume they've had all
No,
that everything, they've got the same kind of level of knowledge, what's the starting point. So ultimately, if you're introducing, or you're teaching about watercolors or printing or working with plaster, whatever it is, you can't make the same kind of developmental assumptions in terms of curriculum experience as
no,
you could in English or maths.
no,
I mean, clearly, if you've got a curriculum map for your school and well, in year 5 they did this, but
mm.
because they do it so infrequently in a typical school, you don't
Yeah,
get it every day,
no,
once a week for an hour, if you're
mm.
lucky, maybe a little longer. Children aren't going to necessarily even remember what they did,
Yeah,
maybe, in the autumn term, and you're now in the summer. So it's like,
absolutely.
where are we starting from
Yeah.
today? What are we
Well,
building on?
that's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. But also, I do think that as children, progress through the school, and if you're giving them really rich experiences, they are going to remember what
Mhm.
they've done and what they've looked at and how they felt about doing it. And I think also going back to this question here, that if it's a Key Stage 2 class, then the children can write their own reflective
Mhm.
comment. And that can also include, any discussions that they've had with anybody.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
could be perhaps you kind of set up a little, group crit or something, and then the child can reflect on what other people have said about their
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
In that, that could be a little lovely little reflective comment in a sketchbook, um,
Mhm.
that the child can then look back at, and that's their own records too, isn't it?
Yeah, and
So,
again, also making use of audio and video, because of course, if it's just written
yeah,
for children that have special educational needs, or English is not their first language, we don't want that to be a barrier. So
no,
it's far easier to express them. Often when I'm teaching, I gesture words. If I can't find the word, I'll use my hands, and actually that
yeah.
non-verbal expression is all
Yeah.
part of it,
Of
So for
course it is.
children, yeah, and it's also
Yeah.
their attitude. So when we're making evaluations of the learning, it's not just can they do it, what did they do, but did
No.
they enjoy it? How motivated, were they excited, were they a
Yeah.
bit nervous? That kind of emotional dimension about their kind of attitude towards the subject, towards the activity, is all part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think again, if you're doing different, 'cause another misconception is about, how you do the same thing, so you just start off here doing this in clay in year 1, and then you do it again in year 3 to make sure they've got better at it, and do it again. And I think that is just ridiculous. And it's about giving children rich experiences across with different
Mhm.
mediums,
Yeah.
so they start to find their own way, because not everyone's going to like clay,
Mhm.
not everyone's going to like drawing, not everyone's going to like, but you find your own way as an artist. You find
Mhm.
your own way and
Yeah.
your own medium. And so it's giving children, I think, rich
Mhm.
experiences that they are going to think, "Do you know what, I didn't really like doing that,
Mhm.
but I did really like
Mhm.
doing
Mhm.
crochet," whatever it is. I know that's what you do, isn't
Mhm.
it?
It's so true. It's so true. So it comes back to the curriculum, doesn't it? It's that you want that really rich offer. So
Yeah.
children know what it feels like to experience these different resources and materials. And not everyone loves everything, but you don't know until you've seen it. You don't know what's possible. It's
Oh,
opening up those possibilities, isn't it?
it
Also, of
indeed,
course,
absolutely.
beyond the classroom, because for some children, the classroom isn't their happy place and they'd rather be up a tree or in a gallery or in a science museum. So it's, you know, the learning outside the classroom where you take a sketchbook or you take a video or you just make some ephemeral art in a forest.
Yes.
That's
But
all
also,
part of.
those are also the sort of things that children are going to remember,
Mm,
so giving children immersive experiences
mm,
and taking them out, like you say, of the comfort zone is
mm,
also really is where learning happens, isn't it? And,
mm,
having a
mm,
change of scene,
mm.
having a going to see something,
Yeah.
going to a gallery, or looking at public art in your local high street, whatever it is you do,
Mm,
children will remember those experiences,
mm,
as most of us do when we think about our own childhoods. And when somebody says to you, what was the most creative thing you remember doing, it's always
mm,
going to be mud pies in the garden, or you making a den, or
mm, mm,
it is that kind of stuff that
mm.
you remember. Yeah,
Yeah. I remember when I was like 10 in primary school, we used lino with very sharp tools. And of course, that kind of dangerous element and the precision and all the planning is really
yeah,
memorable. And it also linked to a project on local mines. So there was a local history connection. So those cross-curricular links as well are also a consideration, aren't they? That, that art as a vehicle for communicating understanding about wider knowledge that's not art specific, but is about other kind of issues and themes and interests.
yeah, absolutely. So we've got just a couple more minutes before 6 o'clock. How do you think we should wrap this up? What kind of message are we trying to give here, Michelle?
I one thought that I share is that it's always interesting to note the child who's a bit subversive. So you set an activity and you say, I want you to make your design in a square, and they choose a circle. Because that is showing that creative spark and what's motivated them to do that. So I think allowing some space, allowing some leeway for kind of a little bit of subversion and what, so, because it tells you something about the child. And it's,
Yeah,
if they've got a really great idea, can you give them some space to explore that and facilitate it? So as you say about being enthusiastic and creating a positive environment.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And really kind of, I would say, bulking against and arguing against having a formal, tick list of
Mm,
what children have done, because you may well have done a really successful
mm,
session with your
mm,
year one class on looking at light and dark, but then you don't just tick that off and go, we've done
mm,
tone,
mhm, mhm.
because it has to be revisited
Yeah,
and
yeah.
done in a
I
different
guess
way. Yeah,
recognizing in some schools, teachers have to do things like that because they're told to. But if you do have to do that, it sits alongside all the wonderful, qualitative, personal, much richer documentation and awareness. And it's not just a list of names and ticks, because that would do
yeah,
a disservice to the children's learning. Because there's always
yes,
that
absolutely.
tension.
It's
I'm being told to do this, isn't there?
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes.
yeah, yeah. But I think once the classroom door is shut and you're in it with your children, you can be, it's like, I was thinking it's a little bit like being Miss Honey,
Oh, yes, yeah.
isn't it? Where you do what you want to do with your children and you get great results.
Mm,
And then if you have to do something or somebody in an office, then just make that work somehow, but don't take any too much store by it, I would
mm,
say.
mhm, mhm.
Very, very subversive of us, Emsha. Well, of me anyway.
No, that sounds good, Sue. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen to your gut, what feels right.
Yeah, and also I think really because we're the experts, you as the primary teacher are the expert, and if you've got good subject knowledge, you can, you know, talk to anybody about the subject and justify what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that be confident as well in your values is
Mhm.
really important in terms of thinking about how we assess children's artwork.
Absolutely. That's a nice sentiment to end on, I think
Yeah.
so.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. It's been great fun. It's gone really quickly.
It has. 30
Yeah.
minutes has flown by,
Yeah.
certainly.
I hope everyone's found it really, really useful and they're not thinking, oh my God, I've got to be subversive now, as well as everything else. Anyway, okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Sue. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.